The year was 1868 when Abigail Thornton found herself standing at the altar of Rivercrest's only church, trembling hands clutching a bouquet of wilting prairie flowers. The crowd of onlookers, most forced to attend by the groom's decree, avoided her desperate gaze. Mayor Harold Blackwood stood beside her, his cold fingers wrapped around her wrist with possession, not affection. As Reverend Miller began the ceremony, the church doors suddenly burst open. Standing in the sunlight, bow drawn, and warriors at his back was Swift Arrow, war chief of the nearby Sioux tribe. "This wedding ends now," he announced in perfect English, his eyes locked on Abigail's. What happened next would change the frontier town of Rivercrest forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Abigail Thornton hadn't planned on settling in Rivercrest. 6 months earlier, she'd been traveling west with her brother Thomas, both orphaned by a Philadelphia influenza outbreak and seeking a fresh start. Their wagon had broken an axle just outside of town, and what was meant to be a brief stop for repairs stretched into weeks as Thomas fell ill with fever. Rivercrest appeared prosperous from a distance, a bustling trading post along the Missouri River with nearly 500 souls, wooden sidewalks, and even a small schoolhouse. But appearances were deceiving. The town operated under the iron fist of Mayor Harold Blackwood, a former military officer who had claimed the position through intimidation rather than election. Dr. Samuel Wilson, the town physician, did what he could for Thomas, but shook his head grimly after examining him. "Typhoid," he whispered to Abigail. "I've seen it take stronger men." Thomas died 3 days later, leaving Abigail alone in a strange town with dwindling funds and no family for 1,000 miles. At 22, she was educated and capable, having worked as a school teacher back east. She approached Mrs. Eleanor Simmons, a widow who ran the town's general store, and secured a position as a clerk. "You're welcome to stay, dear," Mrs. Simmons told her, "but watch yourself around the mayor. He's taken notice of you already." Mayor Blackwood was 45, with a meticulously trimmed mustache and cold, assessing eyes. He'd buried 2 wives already, the first to childbirth, the second, to what townsfolk whispered, was a suspicious fall down the stairs after she'd argued with him publicly. He operated Rivercrest like his personal kingdom, extracting heavy taxes and keeping the small sheriff's office firmly under his control. Abigail first encountered him properly when he came to the store one afternoon, ostensibly to purchase tobacco. "Miss Thornton," he said, removing his hat, "my condolences on your brother, a terrible tragedy." "Thank you, sir," she replied, keeping her eyes lowered as Mrs. Simmons had advised. "I understand you've taken employment here. Admirable industry. In one so recently bereaved." His eyes traveled over her face, lingering uncomfortably. "Though a woman of your evident breeding and education might aspire to more suitable circumstances." When he left, Mrs. Simmons emerged from the back room. "He'll be back," she warned. "Men like Blackwood collect beautiful things, like some collect coins." True to prediction, the mayor began visiting the store daily, always with some trivial purchase as pretext. He brought Abigail gifts, a lace handkerchief, a leather-bound book of poetry, which she tried to refuse, but he insisted upon leaving. Then came the formal dinner invitations to his large house on the hill overlooking town. "I cannot accept, sir," Abigail told him firmly. "It wouldn't be proper, me being alone." "Property is decided by those who govern, Miss Thornton," he replied, with a thin smile. "And in Rivercrest, that would be me." Abigail sought advice from Reverend Miller, but found little comfort. "The mayor is the most powerful man in the 3 counties, the clergyman advised nervously. "His friendship offers protection in these dangerous territories." As winter approached, Abigail's situation grew more precarious. Mrs. Simmons fell ill, and the store's business slowed, Mayor Blackwood chose this moment to press his advantage. "I've purchased the debt on the general store," he informed Abigail one grey November afternoon. "Mrs. Simmons owes considerable sums, which I'm afraid she cannot repay in her current condition." "What does this mean for the store, for Mrs. Simmons?" Abigail asked, dreading the building in her chest. "That depends entirely on you, Miss Thornton." His smile never reached his eyes. "I find myself in need of a wife, someone to manage my household and provide companionship. Someone like yourself." Abigail recoiled. "Sir, I cannot—" "You misunderstand," he interrupted smoothly. "This isn't a proposal so much as an arrangement. Accept, and Mrs. Simmons retains her store and home. Refuse, and I'll be forced to collect on the debt immediately. At her age and with her health, I doubt she would survive a winter without shelter." That night, Abigail paced her small rented room above the store, desperate for options that didn't exist. She had no money for travel, no family to turn to, and winter was settling across the plains. Mrs. Simmons had shown her nothing but kindness. Could Abigail abandon her now? 2 days later, she gave Mayor Blackwood her answer, and preparations for the wedding began immediately. The town's reaction was mixed. Some, like Dr. Wilson, offered quiet sympathy. "If there's ever anything you need," he murmured during a chance meeting on the street. Others, particularly those who benefited from Blackwood's favoritism, offered false congratulations. Sheriff Jenkins, Blackwood's loyal enforcer, made a point of escorting Abigail whenever she left the store. "For your protection," he claimed, though his presence felt more like surveillance. As the wedding day approached, Abigail learned more about the man she was to marry. Blackwood had built his fortune through questionable land deals that pushed out small farmers and through controlling the trade routes along the river. The Sioux tribe that had traditionally hunted and camped in the region had been systematically driven farther west, their access to the river blocked by Blackwood's men. One evening, while closing the store, Abigail was startled by a tap at the back door. She opened it to find a young Sioux woman named Mourning Dove, who spoke broken English but conveyed that she needed medical supplies for her ailing grandfather. "May I not sell to Indians?" Mourning Dove explained, offering a beautifully beaded pouch in trade. Abigail glanced over her shoulder, then quickly gathered what was needed. "Take it," she said, refusing the payment. "Go quickly before the sheriff makes his rounds." Mourning Dove grasped Abigail's hand. "You have a kind heart, not like the man you marry. How did you know?" "All know. Our chief, Swift Arrow, watches over this town. He says Blackwood will bring great trouble soon." 2 nights before the wedding, Abigail made a desperate attempt to flee. She packed a small bag and slipped out after midnight, planning to follow the river north to the next settlement. She hadn't gone 3 miles when Sheriff Jenkins and 2 deputies intercepted her. "Now, Miss Thornton," Jenkins drawled, "did you get lost on an evening stroll? The mayor is mighty concerned about your safety." They escorted her back to town, where Blackwood was waiting on the porch of his house. "I'm disappointed, Abigail," he said calmly. "I thought we had an understanding." He gestured to the sheriff. "Ensure Miss Thornton remains comfortable until our wedding. Perhaps the room upstairs with the new lock." For the next 2 days, Abigail was kept in a well-appointed but securely locked bedroom in Blackwood's house. Her meals were brought by the housekeeper, Mrs. Garrison, who avoided meeting her eyes. On the morning of the wedding, 2 seamstresses arrived to dress her in an elaborate gown that Blackwood had ordered from St. Louis months earlier, clearly intended for whoever he eventually selected as his bride. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Garrison said as she arranged Abigail's hair. "Perhaps marriage to the mayor won't be so terrible. He can be generous when pleased." "And when displeased?" Abigail asked. The housekeeper's silence was enough. The church was full when Sheriff Jenkins escorted Abigail down the aisle. She recognized the faces of townspeople who glanced away uncomfortably as she passed. Mayor Blackwood stood at the altar, in his finest suit, watching her approach with the satisfied look of a man who had acquired a particularly valuable asset. As Reverend Miller began to speak, Abigail noticed a commotion at the back of the church. The doors swung open, flooding the dim interior with harsh daylight. Silhouetted against the glare was a tall figure, flanked by several others. As her eyes adjusted, she recognized the distinctive feathered headdress of a Sioux War Chief. "This wedding ends now," the chief announced in perfect English, stepping into the church. His warriors spread out behind him, bows at the ready. Sheriff Jenkins reached for his gun, but froze when 20 arrows were instantly trained on him. "Swift arrow," Mayor Blackwood said tightly. "You have no authority here. This is a private ceremony in a house of God." The war chief's gaze swept the church before settling on Abigail. "I see no joy in the bride's eyes, only fear. Where I come from, a woman forced to marry is no marriage at all." Blackwood stepped forward. "This woman agreed to be my wife of her own free will. Tell them, Abigail." All eyes turned to her. In that moment, standing between the man who had trapped her and the unexpected intervention that offered an unknown alternative, Abigail Thornton made the decision that would alter not just her fate, but the future of Rivercrest itself. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The church fell silent as Abigail looked from Mayor Blackwood to Swift Arrow. Her hands trembled, but her voice rang clear when she finally spoke. "No," she said, straightening her shoulders. "I did not agree of my own free will." Mayor Blackwood's face darkened. "You ungrateful." He grabbed her arm, fingers digging painfully into her flesh. In one fluid motion, Swift Arrow crossed the distance between them. He stood a head taller than Blackwood, his presence commanding the space. "Remove your hand from her." Sheriff Jenkins and his deputies had their hands hovering over their holsters, but they were outnumbered and outpositioned by the Sioux warriors. The congregation watched in stunned silence, many having never witnessed anyone challenge Blackwood's authority so directly. "This is an outrage," Blackwood hissed, releasing Abigail's arm but not backing down. "Sheriff, arrest these savages for trespassing and disrupting the peace." Dr. Wilson stood from his pew. "Harold, be reasonable. No one needs to get hurt here." Swift Arrow's eyes never left Blackwood's. "We did not come for bloodshed, but we will not leave without justice." He turned to address the congregation. "Your mayor has broken the treaty between our peoples. 3 days ago, his men burned our winter camp and stole our horses while our hunters were away." Murmurs rippled through the church. This was news to most of the townspeople. "That's a damned lie," Blackwood snarled. "If any action was taken against your people, it was because you were trespassing on legally purchased land. Land you stole through false papers," Swift Arrow countered. He reached into a pouch at his waist and pulled out a folded document. "This is the treaty signed by your government 3 summers ago, granting us hunting rights along the north bend of the river. Land you now claim as your own." Reverend Miller stepped forward cautiously. "Perhaps we could discuss these matters civilly after—" "There is nothing to discuss," Blackwood interrupted. "These Indians have no business interfering in town affairs or my personal life." He turned to the congregation. "Anyone who sides with them against me will find themselves unwelcome in Rivercrest." The threat hung heavy in the air. Most townsfolk lowered their eyes, unwilling to challenge the man who controlled their livelihoods. But something had shifted. Doubt had been planted. Abigail, finding courage in Swift Arrow's presence, spoke again. "Mayor Blackwood threatened to evict Mrs. Simmons from her store and home if I refused his proposal. He's kept me locked in his house for the past 2 days to prevent me from leaving town." Dr. Wilson moved to stand beside her. "I've treated too many injuries among those who've crossed you, Harold, including your last wife's broken bones before her accident. This has gone on long enough." Sheriff Jenkins looked uncertainty between his employer and the growing number of townspeople who were beginning to stand. "Mayor, perhaps we should—" "Shut your mouth," Blackwood snapped. "I pay your salary, Jenkins. Remember that." He turned to the Sioux Chief. "You have no authority here. This is white man's territory, governed by white man's law." "A law you twist to serve yourself," Swift Arrow replied evenly. "My people have watched your cruelty grow. When this woman," he gestured to Abigail, "showed kindness to Mourning Dove, we began to hope that not all in your town shared your black heart." Abigail suddenly understood. "You've been watching the town. That's how you knew about the wedding." Swift Arrow nodded. "Mourning Dove told us of your situation. We planned to speak with you, to offer sanctuary if needed. But when we learned you had been confined," his expression darkened. "That, combined with the burning of our winter camp, forced our hand." Mayor Blackwood scoffed. "Sanctuary? With savages? Miss Thornton is an educated white woman. She belongs in civilization, not living in filth with—" "Enough." The new voice belonged to Eleanor Simmons, who had entered the church unnoticed during the confrontation. Though still weak from her illness, she stood with the aid of a walking stick. "Harold Blackwood, I've known you since you first rode into Rivercrest, claiming military honors nobody could verify. I've watched you bully and manipulate your way to power. If Miss Thornton says you coerced her, I believe her." Blackwood's face flushed with rage. "You old fool. You'd be nothing without my generosity. I could crush your business tomorrow." "Perhaps," Mrs. Simmons acknowledged, "but I'm not alone anymore." She looked around the church, where more townspeople were finding their courage. Swift Arrow addressed the congregation again. "We do not wish conflict with Rivercrest. For generations, our people traded peacefully with trappers and settlers. It's only in recent years, under this man's leadership, that blood has been spilled." Dr. Wilson nodded. "He's right. I've lived here for 15 years. We had good relations with the Sioux until Blackwood started pushing them away from the river. The atmosphere in the church had transformed. What had begun as a wedding was becoming a public reckoning." Mayor Blackwood, sensing his control slipping, made a fatal mistake. He lunged for the pistol holstered at Sheriff Jenkins's side. Swift Arrow's warriors instantly raised their bows, but it was Jenkins himself who reacted first. The sheriff grabbed Blackwood's wrist, surprising everyone. "That's enough, Harold," Jenkins said firmly. "I've followed your orders, turned a blind eye to your dealings, but I won't be party to a bloodbath in a church." Blackwood's face contorted with disbelief. "You dare?" "I dare," Jenkins replied. "I took an oath to uphold the law, not your personal vendettas." With his authority crumbling before his eyes, Blackwood made one last, desperate play. He wrenched free from Jenkins, drew a small derringer from inside his coat, and aimed it directly at Abigail. "If I can't have her, no one will." What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Swift Arrow lunged forward. A shot rang out. Women screamed. But it was Blackwood who fell, a knife protruding from his shoulder, thrown with deadly accuracy by Mourning Dove, who had slipped into the church unnoticed and now stood at the back, another blade ready in her hand. The derringer clattered too. The floor, its shot having gone wild and embedded in the wooden ceiling. Sheriff Jenkins quickly retrieved the weapon and restrained the wounded mayor. "Harold Blackwood, I'm placing you under arrest for attempted murder, kidnapping, and fraud," Jenkins announced, suddenly the lawman he had once aspired to be. "Dr. Wilson, he'll need that shoulder treated before we lock him up." As Blackwood was led away, cursing and threatening everyone present, the tension in the church gradually dissipated. Reverend Miller, looking somewhat dazed by the day's events, suggested they all adjourn to the town hall to sort through matters more comfortably. Outside, the spring air felt cleansing after the stifling atmosphere of confrontation. Abigail found herself walking beside Swift Arrow, unsure what to say to the man who had just ended her life. and possibly saved it. "Thank you," she finally managed, "though I don't understand why you would risk so much for a stranger." Swift Arrow's expression softened. "My people believe that all actions ripple outward, like stones cast in water. Your kindness to Morning Dove created such a ripple. We merely answered in kind." At the town hall, an impromptu council formed. Sheriff Jenkins, now acting as town authority, sat with Dr. Wilson, Mrs. Simmons, Reverend Miller, and several respected business owners. Swift Arrow and 2 tribal elders represented the Sioux. Abigail, having been at the center of the day's events, was invited to join them. What emerged over the next hours was the full extent of Blackwood's corruption. The mayor had been systematically falsifying land records, inflating taxes and pocketing the difference, and intimidating anyone who questioned his methods. His burning of the Sioux winter camp had been a calculated move to drive them far enough, away that he could sell their treaty-protected hunting grounds to an Eastern Railroad company scouting for routes west. "The railroad would have made him rich beyond measure," Jenkins explained, "but it would have cut directly through the best Sioux hunting grounds and disrupted migration paths for the buffalo they depend on." Swift Arrow nodded. "Which is why we could not simply move farther west, as your government so often tells us to do. This land has sustained my people for generations. The buffalo, the river, they are our lifeblood." Mrs. Simmons, who had been reviewing the account books Jenkins had retrieved from the mayor's office, looked up. "According to these records, nearly half the taxes Blackwood has been collecting never reached the territorial government. He's been stealing from every business and household in Rivercrest for years." As the depth of Blackwood's schemes became clear, a new problem emerged. The mayor might be imprisoned, but the damage he had done to relations between Rivercrest and the Sioux would not be easily repaired. Years of distrust and manipulated information had left deep scars. Abigail, who had been quietly listening, suddenly spoke. "What if we formalized a new agreement? Not just reaffirming the old treaty, but creating a true partnership between the town and the tribe?" All eyes turned to her. "What kind of partnership?" one of the Sioux elders asked. "Trade, primarily," Abigail suggested. "The Sioux have hunting skills and knowledge of the land that we lack. Rivercrest has manufactured goods and access to eastern markets that could benefit your people. Instead of competing for resources, we could share them." Swift Arrow studied her with new interest. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, Abigail Thornton." Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. "There's precedent for such arrangements in other territories. It would require approval from the territorial governor, but with evidence of Blackwood's corruption, he might be persuaded to support a fresh approach." "The railroad remains a concern," Jenkins pointed out. "They won't abandon their plans just because Blackwood is gone. Then we negotiate with them directly," Abigail proposed. "Find a route that respects the hunting grounds but still brings the benefits of the railroad to Rivercrest. If we present a united front, town and tribe together, they'll have to listen." The discussions continued into the evening, with practical details emerging from the broader vision. By nightfall, the foundations of a new relationship between Rivercrest and the Sioux had been laid. Sheriff Jenkins would serve as interim mayor until proper elections could be held. A delegation, including both townspeople and tribal representatives, would travel to the territorial capital to present their case and evidence against Blackwood. As the meeting concluded, Abigail found herself facing an unexpected question from Mrs. Simmons. "What will you do now, my dear? With Blackwood imprisoned, you're freed from your obligation, but..." The unspoken reality hung between them. Abigail was still alone in a frontier town, with limited resources and no family. "Miss Thornton is welcome to continue her position at the store," Mrs. Simmons offered. Now that business should improve without Blackwood's excessive taxes, I could even offer better compensation. Dr. Wilson cleared his throat. The school teacher position remains unfilled. With your Eastern education, you'd be well qualified. Swift Arrow, who had been conversing with his elders, approached. Or you might consider another path entirely. He gestured to where Mourning Dove, waiting by the door. My sister believes you have much to learn and much to teach. She has asked if you would consider spending time with our people as a kind of emissary between Rivercrest and the Sioux. The offer stunned Abigail. Me? But I know nothing of your ways, which is precisely why the exchange of knowledge would be valuable, Swift Arrow explained. We must understand each other to build true peace. Mourning Dove has offered to teach you our language and customs, and in return you might teach some of our children to read English words. Such skills will become necessary as our worlds continue to intersect. It was a revolutionary idea, a white woman living among the Sioux, not as a captive, but as an honored guest and teacher. Yet something about it resonated with the independent spirit that had driven Abigail west in the first place. I would need time to consider such an arrangement, she said carefully. Swift Arrow nodded. Of course, the invitation remains open. As the meeting dispersed, Abigail stepped outside into the cool night air. The stars spread across the prairie sky in numbers unimaginable in Philadelphia's gaslit streets. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt something like hope stirring within her. A soft footstep announced Mourning Dove's presence beside her. What do you think about my brother's offer? The young woman asked. Abigail nodded. It's unexpected. I'm not sure I'm suited for such a role, Mourning Dove smiled. When I first came to town for medicine, I was afraid, but I found courage because my grandfather needed help. You show kindness when others turn away. That makes you suited, she pointed toward the distant hills where the Sioux encampment lay. Our women are strong, like you. They survive hard winters, birth babies, tan hides, move camp, all while men hunt. They welcome women who stand against bad men. The simplicity of her assessment made Abigail laugh softly. When you put it that way, it does seem I might have something in common with them. Come tomorrow, Mourning Dove suggested. See our camp, then decide. As Mourning Dove returned to where Swift Arrow waited with their horses, Abigail considered the strange turn her life had taken. That morning she had awakened as a prisoner, destined for a loveless marriage to a cruel man. Now, as evening fell, she stood free, with not one path before her but several. The wedding dress she still wore suddenly felt absurd, a costume from a play that had been abruptly cancelled. Tomorrow, she would return it to Blackwood's housekeeper and reclaim her own modest clothing. Then she would consider Mourning Dove's invitation. The frontier, Abigail realized, was not just a physical territory being claimed and contested by different peoples. It was also a boundary within herself, between the constrained life she had known and the unforeseen possibilities that now beckoned. Like the land itself, her future stretched wide and unknown before her, awaiting her decision. Dawn broke over Rivercrest with a peculiar energy, as if the town itself had awakened from a long, troubled sleep. Abigail rose early, exchanging the wedding gown for her simple blue dress, and walked to the general store where Mrs. Simmons was already taking inventory. "You're certain about this?" the older woman asked, watching Abigail pack a small bag with essential items. Visiting an Indian camp alone is not without risk. "I won't be alone," Abigail replied, folding a spare shawl. "Mourning Dove is coming, and to escort me," she paused, considering her next words carefully. "Mrs. Simmons, in the 6 months I've been in Rivercrest, yesterday was the first time I saw anyone stand up to Blackwood, including myself. I let fear dictate my choices." Mrs. Simmons's lined face softened. "Fear is a rational response to a predator child. None of us did better until we had strength in numbers." The Sioux stood against him when they had everything to lose, Abigail pointed out. I owe them at least the courtesy of learning more about them, especially if we're to build this new partnership between our communities. Before Mrs. Simmons could respond, the store door opened, admitting Sheriff Jenkins and Dr. Wilson. Both men looked tired, but resolute. Miss Thornton, Jenkins nodded, removing his hat. I understand you're heading to the Sioux camp today? Word. Travels quickly, Abigail observed. Small towns, Dr. Wilson shrugged. No secrets last long, especially after yesterday's excitement. He set his medical bag on the counter. I've prepared some supplies for you to take to their healer. A goodwill gesture. Jenkins cleared his throat uncomfortably. I've come for a similar purpose. The treaty papers Swift Arrow showed yesterday. They're legitimate. I found copies in Blackwood's safe, along with correspondence proving he knew exactly what he was doing when he sold those hunting grounds to the railroad. What happens now? Mrs. Simmons asked. I've wired the territorial governor, Jenkins replied. With the evidence we have, Blackwood will stand trial for fraud and attempted murder, among other charges. He turned to Abigail. If you're truly going to visit the Sioux, would you convey a message to Chief Swift Arrow? Tell him I'd like to meet on neutral ground in 3 days' time to discuss the treaty violations and how Rivercrest might make amends. Abigail nodded. I believe he'll be receptive. The sound of hoofbeats outside announced Mourning Dove's arrival. Unlike the previous day when she had slipped into town furtively, today she rode openly down Main Street, drawing curious but not hostile stares from townspeople going about their morning business. Dr. Wilson helped Abigail secure her bag behind the saddle of the spare horse Mourning Dove had brought. Be careful, he advised. Not all of Blackwood's supporters have accepted his downfall. Some still blame the Sioux for interfering. Some always will, Abigail acknowledged, but perhaps others can learn to see differently. As Abigail and Mourning Dove rode out of town, they passed Reverend Miller posting a notice cancelling Sunday services for reflection and reconciliation. The clergyman nodded solemnly to them. Further along, they encountered a group of children who waved excitedly, clearly viewing Mourning Dove with curiosity rather than the fear Blackwood had cultivated. Once beyond Rivercrest's boundaries, the prairie opened before them, a vast sea of spring grasses rippling in the breeze. Mourning Dove led them north, following a trail invisible to Abigail's untrained eye. How far is your camp? Abigail asked, adjusting to the rhythm of her horse. 2 hours, Mourning Dove replied. Near River Bend, hidden in a cottonwood grove. As they rode, Mourning Dove pointed out plants and their uses. Wild onions, prairie turnips, berries just beginning to form. She identified bird calls and animal tracks with an ease that made Abigail acutely aware of how little she knew about surviving in this landscape. You read many books? Mourning Dove asked after a period of comfortable silence. Yes, Abigail smiled. I was a teacher in Philadelphia before coming west. Mourning Dove nodded thoughtfully. Books are good for knowing, land good for others knowing. Maybe both together make better wisdom. The simple observation stayed with Abigail as they continued their journey. Her education had prepared her for a world of classrooms and drawing rooms, not this untamed territory where different kinds of knowledge determined survival. The Sioux encampment came into view gradually. First, the thin wisps of cooking fires, then the conical shapes of teepees arranged in a circular pattern among the cottonwoods. Unlike the cramped, rigid layout of Rivercrest with its grid of streets, the Sioux village seemed to flow with the natural contours of the land. Children playing at the camp's edge spotted them first, running to alert the adults. By the time Abigail and Mourning Dove reached the outer circle, a welcome party had formed, led by Swift Arrow and an elderly man wearing an elaborate headdress. Grandfather, Mourning Dove explained quietly. Chief Greyhawk, Swift Arrow's father. Abigail, dismounted carefully, suddenly conscious of being the only white person in sight. The elderly chief studied her with keen eyes that belied his age, then spoke in the Sioux language. Swift Arrow translated, "My father welcomes Abigail Thornton to our camp and thanks her for the kindness shown to his granddaughter." Abigail bowed, her head respectfully. "Please tell him I'm honored by his welcome, and I bring messages from Rivercrest." As Swift Arrow translated, Mourning Dove took Abigail's horse and led it away, signaling for Abigail to follow the chiefs to a large teepee at the center of the camp. Inside, a fire burned in a central pit, its smoke rising through an opening at the peak. Seated around the fire were tribal elders, both men and women, who regarded Abigail with varying degrees of curiosity and caution. Once everyone was seated, Chief Greyhawk began a ritual that Swift Arrow quietly explained involved sharing a ceremonial pipe to establish peaceful intentions. When the pipe reached Abigail, she followed the others' example, accepting it and taking a small puff before passing it on. The tobacco was stronger than she expected, and she struggled not to cough, earning a few amused glances. When the ceremony concluded, Swift Arrow nodded for Abigail to deliver her messages. She relayed Jenkins' request for a meeting and presented Dr. Wilson's medical supplies, which were accepted with dignified appreciation by a middle-aged woman introduced as Singing Bird, the tribe's healer. Chief Greyhawk conferred briefly with his council before responding through Swift Arrow. "We will meet with the new leader of Rivercrest, but not on neutral ground. If he truly seeks new understanding, let him come here to see how we live." Abigail considered this. Sheriff Jenkins may be concerned about appearing to place himself at a disadvantage. Swift Arrow translated this, then responded himself, "Tell him he may bring 2 men with him, just as I brought 2 warriors to your church. Equal numbers, equal respect." The terms seemed fair. Abigail nodded her agreement to convey the message. With the formal business concluded, the gathering dispersed. Swift Arrow offered to show Abigail around the camp, an opportunity she eagerly accepted. What followed was an education unlike any she had received in her years of formal schooling. The Sioux village operated with a precision and order that belied the common frontier belief that native peoples lived in primitive chaos. Every member had defined responsibilities that contributed to the community's overall welfare. Women worked hides into supple leather, sewed clothing, prepared food, and managed the domestic sphere with skill and artistry. Men maintained weapons, planned hunts, and conducted tribal governance. Children learned by observing and assisting, their education practical and constant. "Your people's separation of men and women is not so different from ours," Mourning Dove commented as she joined them, inviting Abigail to help prepare the midday meal. "Just different tasks." Working alongside the Sioux women, Abigail found herself welcomed with a warmth she hadn't expected. Her obvious ineptitude at basic camp tasks, starting a fire without matches, grinding corn with a stone mortar, became a source of good-natured amusement rather than derision. When she managed to successfully flip a corn cake on a hot stone without breaking it, the women cheered as if she'd accomplished something remarkable. "They respect your willingness to learn," Swift Arrow explained, when Abigail expressed surprise at being so readily accepted. "Many white people visit Indian camps to study us like curious animals, not to work beside us." After the meal, Swift Arrow led Abigail to the edge of camp, where several men were crafting arrows, carefully fitting stone points to wooden shafts and securing them with sinew. "These are not war arrows," he explained, showing her the difference in design. "These are for hunting. Our people have always been hunters, not farmers." Which is why the hunting grounds are so important, Abigail realized. Without them we starve, Swift Arrow confirmed grimly, or become dependent on government rations at agencies where agents steal half of what is promised. He led her further, to where an ancient cottonwood stood apart from the others. Its massive trunk was scarred and weathered, branches reaching skyward like arms in supplication. "This tree has seen 200 winters," Swift Arrow said. "Our grandfathers' grandfathers performed ceremonies beneath it. It has witnessed the buffalo herd so vast they took days to pass. It saw the first white trappers arrive, then the first settlers." His expression grew somber. "Soon it may witness the end of our way of life." "It doesn't have to," Abigail countered. "Not if we find a better path forward together." Swift Arrow studied her face. "You speak with hope, Abigail Thornton, but hope without understanding is just a pleasant dream." The challenge in his words was clear. If she truly wished to help bridge the divide between their peoples, mere goodwill wasn't enough. She would need deeper knowledge. As the day progressed, Abigail observed a community preparing for significant change. Young men practiced speaking English with varying degrees of success. Swift Arrow explained that some had attended the Indian school at the government agency, a revelation that surprised Abigail. "You've adapted before," she observed. "Adaptation is survival," he replied. "But there is a difference between adapting and surrendering. We adapt to preserve what matters most, our identity as Sioux." When evening fell, the camp gathered around larger fires. Food was shared, stories told, songs sung. To Abigail's surprise, Swift Arrow invited her to join his family's circle, where Chief Greyhawk sat with Mourning Dove and several other relatives. Using Swift Arrow as translator, the elderly chief questioned Abigail about her journey west, her life before, and her thoughts on what she had witnessed in their camp. His queries were sharp and specific, revealing an intellect that transcended the language barrier. "My father asks why you would consider spending time among us," Swift Arrow translated. "What do you seek?" Abigail considered the question carefully. "Initially, I came out of gratitude and curiosity. Now, having seen your community, I recognize an opportunity to learn and perhaps to help create understanding between our peoples." When this was translated, Chief Greyhawk nodded slowly. He spoke at length, his weathered hands gesturing expressively. "My father says," Swift Arrow translated, "that bridges between peoples are built by those who can walk in both worlds while remaining true to themselves. He believes you may have such an ability, but wonders if you have the courage to use it." Abigail met the old chief's penetrating gaze. "I don't know if I have such courage, but I would like to find out." The conversation shifted to practical matters. If Abigail were to spend time with the tribe as an emissary and teacher, arrangements would need to be made. She would live in Mourning Dove's family teepee, learn their language and customs, and in return teach English and reading to those who wish to learn. Not just children, Swift Arrow emphasized. Many adults wish to understand the white man's words on paper, treaties, laws, newspapers. These shape our future now. As the fires burned low and families retired to their teepees, Mourning Dove showed Abigail to the sleeping place prepared for her, a bed of soft furs in the family dwelling she shared with her grandparents and unmarried cousins. "Tomorrow, you see, more," Mourning Dove promised. "Then decide." In the quiet darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the camp settling for the night, Abigail reflected on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. Just 2 days ago, she had been a prisoner in Blackwood's house, resigned to a future of subjugation. Now she lay in a Sioux camp, contemplating a role no white woman she knew of had undertaken. The following morning brought new experiences. Singing. Bird, the tribal healer, invited Abigail to accompany her gathering medicinal plants. The older woman spoke no English, communicating through gestures and demonstrations. She showed Abigail plants that stopped bleeding, eased pain, reduced fever, and healed wounds. Knowledge passed through generations of careful observation. In return, Abigail examined the medical supplies Dr. Wilson had sent, explaining their uses to singing bird through Mourning Dove's translation. The healer was particularly interested in the small bottle of laudanum, which Abigail explained was similar to the willowbark tea the Sioux used for pain, but stronger and more dangerous. If misused, midday brought the return of a hunting party with freshly killed deer. Abigail watched as the animals were efficiently butchered, with specific parts allocated according to tribal custom. Nothing was wasted. Meat for food, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, sinew for thread, organs for specific uses. This is why Blackwood's actions threatened more than just our hunting, Swift Arrow explained as he joined her. Each part of the animal serves a purpose in our way of life. Without them, we cannot make shelters, clothing, tools, the essentials for survival. As the afternoon waned, Swift Arrow suggested they ride to the burned winter camp. If you are to understand what lies between our peoples, you should see what Blackwood's men did. The ride took less than an hour. The destruction was evident even from a distance. Blackened earth where teepees had stood, charred remnants of possessions too large to carry away quickly. Swift Arrow walked Abigail through the site, pointing out where family dwellings had been, arranged, where food had been stored for the harsh prairie winter. They came before dawn, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Our hunters had left the previous day, tracking buffalo. Only women, children, and elders remained. He knelt, picking up a small carved toy horse, its surface scorched, but still recognizable. They gave them minutes to flee, then burned everything. Had Mourning Dove not ridden to alert the hunting party, our people might have returned to find nothing but ashes. Abigail felt sick. Did anyone die? Swift Arrow shook his head. Not this time, but 2 children and an elder developed lung sickness from the smoke and cold. His eyes met hers. This is what treaties meant to Blackwood. Paper promises to be broken whenever convenient. Standing amid the destruction, Abigail understood with clarity why Chief Greyhawk had insisted Jenkins come to their current camp. The sheriff needed to see firsthand what his former employer had sanctioned. They rode back to the camp in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. As they approached, the scene before them was transformed from that morning. Teepees partially dismantled, belongings being packed, horses gathered in temporary corrals. "What's happening?" Abigail asked, alarmed. "We will move camp tomorrow," Swift Arrow explained. "It was already planned before your visit. Summer hunting grounds are different from spring gathering places." The implication struck Abigail immediately. If she were to stay with the Sioux, she would need to adapt to their nomadic patterns, moving with the seasons, living not in a fixed location, but following resources and ancient traditions. That evening, as the tribe made final preparations for the next day's move, Abigail sat with Chief Greyhawk's family once more. The old chief spoke at length, with Swift Arrow translating. "My father says you have a decision to make, Abigail Thornton. You have seen our ways, not all, but enough to understand we are not what your people often believe. You have also seen what some men like Blackwood would do to us." He paused, ensuring she grasped the weight of the moment. "The path between our worlds is difficult. Few walk it successfully. If you choose to try, you must commit fully, not as a visitor who may leave when things become uncomfortable, but as one who seeks true understanding." In the firelight, surrounded by faces that had been strangers just a day before, Abigail felt the crossroads of her life stretching before her. The comfortable path led back to Rivercrest, to the teaching position Dr. Wilson had mentioned, to a life recognizable though forever changed by recent events. The unknown path led into the heart of a culture she barely understood, to challenges she could scarcely imagine, but also to an opportunity unlike any other. Mourning Dove, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke. "My grandfather says choice must be yours alone. But I say this, our worlds already touch, already change each other. Better to guide that change with wisdom than let it happen without care. As night settled over the camp for the last time before the move, Abigail stood at the threshold of becoming someone new. Not just a frontier woman who had escaped an unwanted marriage, but perhaps a bridge between peoples who had viewed each other with suspicion for too long. Her decision would shape not only her own future, but potentially the relationship between Rivercrest and the Sioux for years to come. Dawn had barely broken when the Sioux camp stirred to life. With practiced efficiency, women dismantled teepees, while men packed hunting gear and readied horses. Children gathered their few possessions, excited by the prospect of the journey. Abigail watched in fascination as an entire community prepared to relocate with a coordination that would humble a military regiment. "You return to Rivercrest today?" Morning Dove asked, finding Abigail by the remnants of the previous night's fire. Abigail had spent much of the night contemplating her decision. "No," she replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'd like to stay, if your grandfather still approves." Morning Dove's face brightened. "He will be pleased. I'll tell him now." While Morning Dove sought out Chief Greyhawk, Swift Arrow approached, leading Abigail's horse. "Have you decided?" "I have. I wish to learn from your people and perhaps help bridge the divide between our worlds." Swift Arrow studied her face, searching for doubt or hesitation. Finding none, he nodded. "A brave choice. Not easy, but worthy." He handed her the reins. "If you are to travel with us, you should deliver your message to Sheriff Jenkins first. We camp tonight at Crooked Creek, then continue north tomorrow." "Will you accompany me?" Abigail asked. "No. Your word will carry more weight if you return, alone, as one who has been welcomed, not escorted." He glanced toward the bustling camp. "Besides, my place is here during the move. My father is too old to oversee everything, though he would never admit it." Abigail understood the practicality of this arrangement, though anxiety fluttered in her chest at the prospect of returning to Rivercrest as an emissary of the Sioux. Would her fellow townspeople understand her decision, or would they see it as betrayal? By mid-morning, she was riding back to town with messages for both Sheriff Jenkins and Mrs. Simmons. The prairie stretched around her, alive with spring growth and teeming wildlife. Hawks circled overhead, rabbits darted through the grass, and in the distance, a small herd of deer grazed undisturbed. The landscape that had once seemed alien and threatening now revealed its subtle beauties to her more observant eye. Rivercrest appeared on the horizon sooner than she expected. The town looked different somehow, smaller, more provincial, after her brief immersion in the Sioux way of life. As she rode down Main Street, townsfolk paused their activities to watch her pass. Some nodded in greeting, others whispered behind raised hands. The failed wedding and dramatic confrontation remained fresh gossip. She dismounted outside the sheriff's office, tying her horse to the hitching post. Inside, she found Jenkins at his desk, poring over ledgers confiscated from Blackwood's home. "Miss Thornton," he said, rising quickly, "you've returned safely. How was your visit to the Sioux camp?" "Educational, Sheriff. And I bring Chief Greyhawk's response to your request for a meeting." Jenkins gestured for her to sit. "I'm all ears." "The chief has agreed to meet, but not on neutral ground as you suggested. He invites you to come to their camp at Crooked Creek, where they'll be staying temporarily during their seasonal move north. You may bring 2 men with you, just as Swift Arrow brought 2 warriors to the church." Jenkins frowned slightly. "That puts us at a distinct disadvantage, surrounded by their entire tribe. With respect, Sheriff, the Sioux have been at a disadvantage in every negotiation with white authorities for years. This is a gesture of trust on their part, allowing you into their temporary home while they're vulnerable during migration." Abigail met his gaze steadily. "I've seen firsthand the destruction Blackwood's men unleashed on their winter camp. Trust must begin somewhere." The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. When does the chief propose we meet? Tomorrow. I can guide. You there? Jenkins's eyebrows rose. You're returning to them. I am. Abigail straightened her shoulders. Chief Greyhawk has offered me a unique opportunity to live among the Sioux, to learn their ways and teach English to those who wish to learn. I've accepted. A long silence followed this announcement. Jenkins studied her with new interest. That's an unusual choice for a woman of your background, Miss Thornton. Some might call it reckless. Some called it reckless when I traveled west. With only my brother for company, she countered. The frontier demands adaptation, Sheriff. Perhaps this is how I'm meant to contribute. Eventually, Jenkins nodded. I'll meet with Dr. Wilson and Reverend Miller to discuss who should accompany me tomorrow. What time should we depart? Early morning would be best. The ride takes several hours. Their business concluded, Abigail headed to the general store. She found Mrs. Simmons inventorying supplies. With the help of a young woman, Abigail didn't recognize. Abigail, Mrs. Simmons exclaimed, embracing her warmly. I worried when you didn't return last night. I'm sorry for causing concern, Abigail replied. There was much to learn, and Chief Greyhawk invited me to stay. The older woman's expression grew serious. Come to the back room. We should talk privately. Once they were seated at the small table where Mrs. Simmons took her meals, Abigail explained her decision. The storekeeper listened without interruption, her weathered face revealing little. You've always struck me as sensible, Abigail, she said finally, not prone to romantic notions or foolish risks, so I must assume you've considered this carefully. I have. It won't be easy, but I believe it's important. Not just for me, but for relations between Rivercrest and the Sioux going forward. Mrs. Simmons sighed. The town will talk, of course. Some will say you've gone native, others that you've lost your mind. A few may even suspect coercion. And what do you think? The older woman reached across the table to pat Abigail's hand. I think you're following your conscience, which is never a bad compass, even when it leads down difficult trails. She rose and went to a cabinet, withdrawing a small wooden box. If you're determined on this course, you'll need practical essentials. These are yours. Take them. Inside the box was a compact sewing kit, a small mirror, a sturdy jackknife, and $20 in coins, a small fortune on the frontier. Mrs. Simmons, I can't accept. Nonsense. Consider it back wages I should have paid you months ago if Blackwood hadn't been bleeding my business dry. She closed Abigail's fingers around the box. The Sioux are proud people, but winter comes hard on the plains. There may be times when these things prove useful for trade or emergencies. Deeply touched, Abigail embraced the woman who had been her only friend during the darkest days in Rivercrest. As she prepared to leave, a commotion in the street drew their attention. A small crowd had gathered outside the sheriff's office, voices raised in argument. Abigail and Mrs. Simmons stepped onto the boardwalk to investigate. At the center of the disturbance stood Frank Weber, owner of the livery stable and one of Blackwood's most vocal supporters. He was gesturing angrily as he addressed the gathering. Letting Indians dictate terms to honest citizens. Blackwood understood how to handle savages. Now we're sending delegations to beg for their forgiveness. Sheriff Jenkins stood on the office steps, arms crossed. No one's begging, Frank. We're negotiating to correct wrongs committed by Blackwood against people who have legal rights to hunting grounds he illegally sold. Legal rights. They're Indians, Weber spat. Next, you'll be letting them shop in our stores and drink in our saloon. The Sioux traded peacefully in Rivercrest for years before Blackwood stirred up trouble, Dr. Wilson interjected, having joined the gathering. Some of us remember those days and wouldn't mind seeing them return. Weber noticed Abigail and pointed accusingly. There she is, the woman who brought this down on us by rejecting the mayor. Now I hear she's living with the Redskins, probably, warming that chief's bed. The crude accusation hung in the air like gunsmoke. Before anyone could respond, Mrs. Simmons stepped forward, her diminutive frame vibrating with anger. Frank Weber, you should be ashamed. Miss Thornton was nearly forced into marriage with a man who threatened and imprisoned her. When she finally found the courage to speak the truth, she exposed corruption that was strangling this town, including your own livery business, though you're too stubborn to admit Blackwood was robbing you blind. Weber's face reddened, but Mrs. Simmons wasn't finished. As for her choice to learn about our neighbors, it shows more intelligence and foresight than most in this town have displayed. The railroad is coming, Frank. Change is coming whether we welcome it or not. Better to have someone who understands both sides than to blunder forward in ignorance. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Not everyone shared Weber's hostility, Abigail realized. Many were simply uncertain, caught between old prejudices and new possibilities. Sheriff Jenkins seized the moment. Tomorrow, Dr. Wilson and I will meet with Chief Greyhawk to discuss a new arrangement between Rivercrest and the Sioux. Anyone with legitimate concerns can speak with me today, but I won't tolerate threats or actions against Miss Thornton or any peaceful Indians. That era ended with Blackwood's arrest. The impromptu gathering gradually dispersed, though Weber stalked away muttering darkly to a few like-minded individuals. Abigail approached Jenkins and Dr. Wilson. "Thank you for your support," she said quietly. Dr. Wilson smiled kindly. "Your decision surprised us, but upon reflection, it makes a certain sense. Few have your combination of education and adaptability." "There's something you should know." Abigail lowered her voice. "Not everyone in Blackwood's circle has been identified. He had connections beyond Rivercrest, suppliers of illegal whiskey to the reservations, land speculators waiting to profit from the railroad." Jenkins nodded grimly. "We've found correspondence suggesting as much, which is why I've asked Reverend Miller to remain in town tomorrow rather than accompany us. Better to have a respected voice here in case trouble brews during our absence." The remainder of the day passed swiftly as Abigail gathered additional supplies for her extended stay with the Sioux. Dr. Wilson contributed medicines and bandages, explaining their uses so she could assist Singing Bird if needed. Mrs. Simmons added practical items, sturdy boots, wool blankets, and waterproof groundcloth. Reverend Miller provided a small Bible and, more surprisingly, a compact volume on the Sioux language compiled by a missionary. "It's rudimentary," he admitted, "but might help in your early days with them." By evening, Abigail had said her goodbyes to the small circle of townspeople who had supported her. She spent her last night in Rivercrest in her room above the general store, listening to the familiar sounds of the settlement, piano music from the saloon, the occasional whine of horses, the night watchman's call of "all's well" as he made his rounds. Tomorrow would bring a new chapter in her life, one without the conventions and comforts she had known. There would be no feather beds or porcelain teacups, no Sunday services or literary discussions. Instead, she faced a world of practical skills, ancient traditions, and natural rhythms. The prospect was both terrifying and exhilarating. Sheriff Jenkins and Dr. Wilson were ready at dawn, mounted on sturdy horses and dressed for the journey. A small crowd of early risers gathered to watch them depart, some offering encouragement, others maintaining suspicious silence. Weber was notably absent, which Jenkins considered a small blessing. The ride to Crooked Creek took nearly 4 hours. As they approached the location, Abigail spotted smoke from cooking fires rising above a stand of trees along the winding waterway. The Sioux had established their temporary camp on a plateau overlooking the creek, providing both water access and a defensive position. Scouts had obviously reported their approach, for Swift Arrow and 2 mounted warriors met them a quarter-mile from the camp. The atmosphere was tense but courteous as the groups exchanged formal greetings. "Sheriff Jenkins," Swift Arrow acknowledged, "you honor us by accepting our invitation." "Chief Swift Arrow," Jenkins replied, using the title respectfully, though he knew Greyhawk was the principal chief. "We come seeking honest dialogue. Swift." Arrow nodded. "Then you will find it. My father awaits." The camp had a different configuration from the previous settlement, adapted to the terrain and temporary nature of their stay. Teepees were arranged in a horseshoe pattern facing away from the prevailing wind. At the center, a council fire burned before a large teepee decorated with painted symbols of authority. Chief Greyhawk emerged as they dismounted, dignity evident in his bearing despite his advanced years. Through Swift Arrow's translation, formal welcomes were exchanged, followed by the ritual sharing of a pipe to establish peaceful intentions. The negotiations that followed lasted hours, moving from the central fire to the chief's teepee when afternoon rain threatened. Jenkins presented documentation of Blackwood's fraud, including evidence that the mayor had forged territorial approvals for land sales that were never authorized. In return, Swift Arrow and the tribal elders detailed the boundaries of their traditional hunting grounds, emphasizing areas critical for winter survival. Maps were drawn in the dirt floor of the teepee, then transcribed to paper by Dr. Wilson, who revealed an unexpected talent for draftsmanship. "The railroad remains the greatest challenge," Jenkins acknowledged as the discussion progressed. "They've invested considerable money in the route Blackwood sold them." Swift Arrow conferred with his father before responding. "We do not oppose the Iron Horse itself. Our objection is to the specific path that cuts through the heart of our hunting grounds and the buffalo migration trails." This admission surprised Jenkins. "Would you accept an alternative route?" "We are not blind to changes coming," Swift Arrow replied. "The buffalo grow fewer each year. Trade brings tools and goods that help our people survive, but we must protect what sustains us now while we prepare for what lies ahead." Dr. Wilson leaned forward eagerly. "If I may suggest the southern approach. A long cedar ridge would avoid the primary hunting grounds, while still bringing the railroad within 5 miles of Rivercrest." This suggestion sparked intense discussion. Maps were redrawn, calculations made regarding distances and terrain. By late afternoon, a framework had emerged, a compromise route for the railroad, formal recognition of Sioux hunting rights in specific areas, and a trade agreement allowing the tribe to sell hides and crafts in Rivercrest without harassment. As Jenkins and Swift Arrow finalized the details, Abigail sat with Chief Greyhawk and Dr. Wilson. The elderly chief studied her, with those penetrating eyes that seemed to evaluate her very spirit. "My father asks if you have found peace with your decision," Swift Arrow translated from across the teepee, temporarily shifting his attention from Jenkins. "I believe I have," Abigail replied, "though I know the path will not be easy." When this was translated, Greyhawk nodded and spoke again at length. "He says," Swift Arrow translated, "that the most valuable bridges are those built where the river runs strongest. Your presence among us may seem strange to both our peoples, but in time, its worth will be recognized." As twilight approached, the negotiations concluded with a shared meal, a feast of venison, wild turnips, and corn cakes prepared by the women of the tribe. Jenkins and Dr. Wilson would return to Rivercrest the following morning, carrying the proposed agreement to be formalized later with territorial officials. During the meal, Abigail observed the subtle interactions between the Sioux and her former neighbors. Initial stiffness gradually yielded to cautious conversation, with Swift Arrow facilitating exchanges about weather patterns, hunting conditions, and local geography, neutral topics that nonetheless revealed shared concerns and compatible knowledge. "You were right to accept their invitation," Dr. Wilson murmured to Jenkins. "Seeing how they live, understanding their relationship to the land, it changes one's perspective." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Blackwood painted them as obstacles to progress, but they're simply people protecting their way of life, no different than we would in their position. As darkness fell, the visitors were shown to a guest teepee prepared for their overnight stay. Abigail, now officially a resident of the camp, joined Mourning Dove's family circle. Word of her decision to stay had spread throughout the community, eliciting reactions ranging from curiosity to skepticism to cautious welcome. "Tomorrow we continue our journey," Mourning Dove explained as they prepared sleeping furs. 3 days. To summer hunting grounds near Black Hills. Many buffalo there. The enormity of Abigail's decision suddenly washed over her. Tomorrow, she would watch Jenkins and Dr. Wilson ride back to Rivercrest, the last connection to her former life disappearing across the prairie. She would travel with the Sioux to their summer camp, immersing herself completely in their nomadic existence. "Are you afraid?" Mourning Dove asked perceptively. "Yes," Abigail admitted, "but not enough to change my mind." Mourning Dove smiled. "Good fear makes us careful. Bad fear makes us small." She reached into her bundle and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. "Gift for you, to mark a new beginning." Inside was a beautifully beaded hair ornament, a cascade of blue and white beads forming a pattern of flowing water. "Blue for your eyes," Mourning Dove explained. "Water pattern, because you crossed a great river to be here, not just Missouri River, but river between our worlds." Deeply touched, Abigail struggled to express her gratitude. But as she met Mourning Dove's understanding gaze, she realized that some connections transcended language and custom. In this young Sioux woman, she had found not just a teacher, but perhaps a friend, the first bridge forming between the separate worlds she would now inhabit. Outside, the night sky blazed with stars undiminished by town lights. Somewhere to the east lay Rivercrest and the life Abigail had left behind. To the north waited the unknown future she had chosen. Between them stretched the vast prairie, indifferent to human boundaries, yet connecting all who traveled its expanse. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new understandings. But tonight, in the quiet of the camp beside Crooked Creek, Abigail Thornton found herself exactly where she needed to be, at the threshold of becoming someone new, someone who might help write a different story for the frontier's future. The journey to the summer hunting grounds tested Abigail in ways she hadn't anticipated. 3 days of riding across increasingly rugged terrain left her muscles aching and her fair skin burned by the relentless prairie sun, despite Mourning Dove's herbal salves. Yet she refused to complain, determined to prove herself worthy of the tribe's acceptance. Swift Arrow rode alongside her periodically, explaining the landmarks that guided their migration. "Those rock formations," he pointed to distant outcroppings that resembled sentinels, "have marked this trail for generations. Our grandfathers' grandfathers followed the same path." Abigail marveled at this sense of continuity, so different from the restless progression of white settlement that constantly sought new territories and abandoned the old. "How many times have you made this journey?" "Every year since I could sit on a horse," he replied. "My first summer hunt, I was 8 winters old. My father presented me with my first bow, small but real." His expression softened at the memory. "I failed to hit anything larger than a rabbit, but my pride was immense." These glimpses into Swift Arrow's past revealed a different man from the stern war chief who had interrupted her wedding. Here among his people, leading them to ancestral hunting grounds, he displayed a quiet humor and thoughtful nature that Abigail found increasingly compelling. On the second night, as they camped near a small tributary of the Missouri, Swift Arrow invited Abigail to join a teaching circle where elders shared tribal history with the children. Unable to understand the Sioux language yet, she nonetheless observed the animated storytelling, the elders using gestures and vocal inflections that transcended the language barrier. The children sat enthralled, occasionally erupting in laughter or gasps at dramatic moments. "What was that story about?" she asked Mourning Dove afterward. "How Coyote stole fire from the thunder beings to give to the people," Mourning Dove explained. "Old stories teach important lessons. This one shows how cunning can serve good purposes, when courage alone is not enough." Abigail thought of the books she had treasured in Philadelphia, Shakespeare, Dickens, Austen, stories that had shaped her understanding of the world. "Every culture has its teaching tales," she observed. "Perhaps that's where we might begin building understanding, through our stories." Mourning Dove nodded thoughtfully. "Tomorrow night, maybe you will tell a story to your people." The suggestion both excited and intimidated Abigail. What tale from her culture might resonate with the Sioux? She spent much of the next day's ride contemplating possibilities. That evening, with Swift Arrow translating, she told the story of Prometheus bringing fire to humanity, a deliberate parallel to the Coyote tale. The children watched her animated gestures with curiosity, and when Swift Arrow translated the punishment Zeus inflicted, chaining Prometheus to a rock where an eagle ate his liver daily, several boys exclaimed in sympathetic horror, "Your people's stories are not so different from ours," an elder commented afterward. "Brave ones who suffer to help others." This small success buoyed Abigail's spirits as they continued north. On the third day, the landscape changed dramatically. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, dotted with ponderosa pines. In the distance, black-hued mountains rose against the horizon. "The Paha Sapa," Swift Arrow announced, "what your people call the Black Hills, sacred land to the Lakota." By mid-afternoon, they reached their destination, a broad valley nestled between protective ridges with a clear stream running through its center. Ancient campsites were evident from fire rings and bare patches where teepees had stood in previous seasons. The tribe fell into a practiced routine, women directing the placement of the teepees, while men scouted the surrounding area for signs of buffalo herds and potential threats. Children and elders gathered firewood and freshened the old fire pits. Singing Bird, the healer, beckoned Abigail to accompany her along the stream banks. "Many healing plants grow here," Mourning Dove translated as they walked. "Singing Bird says, you must learn them for summer sicknesses." For the next hour, Abigail received an intensive education in medicinal plants, which leaves to crush for poultices, which roots to steep for fever teas, and which barks contained pain-relieving properties. She struggled to remember the Sioux names, but recognized the practical value of this knowledge. As the camp took shape, Abigail noticed a group of young men preparing for what appeared to be a hunting party. Swift Arrow moved among them, checking weapons and issuing instructions. "First hunt tomorrow," Mourning Dove explained, noticing Abigail's attention. "Scout party goes now to find buffalo herd. If signs are good, all hunters leave at dawn." That evening, a special ceremony was conducted to ensure a successful hunt. Abigail watched, fascinated, as tribal members performed rituals their ancestors had practiced for centuries before these same hills. The haunting songs and rhythmic drumming continued long after darkness fell, the sacred music rising towards stars that seemed close enough to touch in the clear mountain air. When she finally retired to Mourning Dove's family teepee, Abigail found herself overwhelmed by the cultural immersion of the past days. She removed the small journal she had brought, recording her observations by the dim light of the central fire. How could she possibly capture this experience for the people of Rivercrest? How could words bridge the vast gulf of understanding? Dawn broke with a flurry of activity as the hunting party prepared to depart. Swift Arrow approached Abigail as she helped Mourning Dove prepare morning food. "I leave 2 bears to guard the camp," he said, referring to one of his trusted warriors. "If trouble comes, he will protect everyone." Abigail nodded. "Be safe, Swift Arrow." Something in her tone made him pause. Their eyes held for a moment longer than usual before he turned to mount his horse, leading the hunting party into the hills. The hunter's absence transformed the camp's dynamic. While the remaining warriors maintained vigilant watches, women took the opportunity to work on larger projects, stretching stored hides for new tipis, beginning elaborate beadwork, repairing winter clothing. Children practiced with small bows, or played complex games with painted stones and sticks. Mourning Dove and her female cousins invited Abigail to join them at the stream, where they washed hair with yucca root soap and shared stories of their first hunts, first romances, first experiences with women's mysteries. Despite the language barriers and cultural differences, Abigail found herself laughing alongside them, drawn into their circle of feminine camaraderie. "What was your man like in the East Place?" Mourning Dove asked suddenly. Abigail hesitated. "I'd never had a husband or sweetheart. I was focused on teaching, then on caring for my brother when he fell ill." This revelation surprised the young women. One of the cousins, Willow Song, spoke rapidly to Mourning Dove, who translated with diplomatic care. "Willow Song says it's strange for a woman your age not to have a man. Ask if Eastern men blind or foolish." The comment brought unexpected laughter, in from Abigail. "Perhaps a bit of both. Or perhaps I was waiting for something I couldn't yet imagine." The young women exchanged knowing glances, and Abigail realized with some embarrassment that they had misconstrued her meaning. "I didn't mean," she began, but was interrupted by shouts from the camp. The hunting party had returned, far earlier than expected, and without game. Something was wrong. The women hurried back to find the camp in commotion. Swift Arrow was issuing rapid commands while warriors armed themselves. "What's happening?" Abigail asked, searching for Mourning Dove in the confusion. "Army soldiers," came the grim reply. "Blue coats crossing our hunting grounds to the north. Many horses, many guns." Fear rippled through the camp. Relations between the Sioux and the U.S. Army had been tense since conflicts further west. While this band had maintained peaceful trading relations with settlements like Rivercrest, the military often made little distinction between hostile and friendly tribes. Swift Arrow gathered the community. "We must prepare to defend ourselves, if necessary," he announced, with Mourning Dove whispering translations to Abigail. "But first, we will try to speak with them. Perhaps they only pass through." Chief Greyhawk conferred with the tribal elders before addressing his son. When Swift Arrow translated for Abigail, his face was tight with concern. "My father reminds us that we have done nothing to provoke an attack. We should show strength. But avoid conflict if possible. I will ride out with 4 warriors to meet the soldiers. The rest will prepare the camp for defense." Abigail stepped forward. "Let me accompany you. A white woman might help prevent misunderstandings." Swift Arrow considered this. "It could place you in danger." "I'm already part of this camp," she countered. "If danger comes, it comes to all of us." After brief consultation with his father, Swift Arrow agreed. "Stay close to me. Speak only when I indicate." Within minutes, they were riding north, Swift Arrow and 4 warriors in traditional dress, Abigail conspicuous in her blue riding skirt. They followed a ridge that provided views across the rolling terrain, finally spotting the military column. In a valley below, approximately 50 cavalry soldiers escorting supply wagons. Swift Arrow raised his hand, and their small party halted on the ridgeline, clearly visible against the sky. It was a deliberate move, announcing their presence, without appearing threatening. The cavalry column soon noticed them, and a contingent of soldiers broke away, riding up the slope. "Let me approach first," Abigail suggested. "It will signal peaceful intentions." Swift Arrow nodded reluctantly. "First sign of threat. Retreat." Immediately, Abigail urged her horse forward, heart pounding as she rode alone toward the approaching soldiers. As they drew closer, she recognized the insignia of a captain on the lead rider. "Ma'am?" The officer reined in his horse, clearly surprised to encounter a white woman. "Are you in distress?" "Not at all, Captain," she replied calmly. "I'm here as a guest and interpreter for Chief Swift Arrow of the Lakota Sioux. He wishes to inquire about your presence in these hunting grounds." The captain's eyebrows rose. "You're with them voluntarily?" "I am. There's a peaceful settlement at Rivercrest that's established new agreements with this band. May I ask your business here?" The officer studied her thoughtfully before answering. "Captain James Richardson, 7th Cavalry. We're escorting supplies to Fort Laramie and scouting this region on orders from Colonel Harney." Abigail's stomach tightened. Colonel Harney was notorious for his brutal tactics against native tribes. "These Sioux have legal hunting rights here, recognized by the territorial governor. They've maintained peaceful relations with settlements east of here." Captain Richardson glanced toward Swift Arrow and his warriors, who remained on the ridge, watching intently. "I have no quarrel with peaceful Indians, ma'am, but my orders include identifying all Sioux encampments in this region." Abigail understood the implication. This information could later be used to plan military actions. "Perhaps you might speak directly with Chief Swift Arrow. A respectful exchange now could prevent misunderstandings later." After slight hesitation, Richardson nodded. "I'll meet him, but only with a small party. My men will remain at their current position." Abigail returned to Swift Arrow, explaining the situation. "This captain seems reasonable, but he's under orders to map Sioux locations. That information could be dangerous in the wrong hands." Swift Arrow considered this. "We cannot prevent them from finding our camp. The signs are clear to any trained eye. Better to meet openly and learn their true intentions." The meeting that followed was tense but civil. Captain Richardson dismounted as a gesture of respect, and Swift Arrow reciprocated. With Abigail translating, they exchanged formal greetings before addressing the situation. "My men need water and brief rest," Richardson explained. "We've been traveling for 6 days from Fort Pierre. We have no intention of disturbing your camp if you permit us to use the stream 2 miles north of here." Swift Arrow nodded. "The water belongs to no man, but I must ask why Colonel Harney seeks information about peaceful hunting camps." The captain's expression remained neutral. "Standard reconnaissance. The territorial government wants updated information on all settlements, white and Indian, following recent conflicts further west." It wasn't the whole truth, Abigail suspected, but neither was it an immediate threat. Swift Arrow apparently reached the same conclusion. "You may water your horses and rest your men at the North Stream," he said. "As a gesture of peace, we will send meat if our hunters are successful today. But we ask that you continue your journey tomorrow and respect our hunting grounds." Richardson agreed to these terms, adding, "I'll report that this band is peaceful and operating within established treaty rights. That's the truth, and that's what I'll document." As they parted ways, the captain turned to Abigail. "Ma'am, might I have a private word?" Swift Arrow tensed, but Abigail nodded reassuringly. "I'll rejoin you momentarily." When they were alone, Richardson spoke quietly. "I should inform you that your presence here is causing some talk in the settlements. Patrol reported to Fort Pierre that a white woman was living willingly among the Sioux. Some officials find it concerning. My arrangements have been reported to Sheriff Jenkins in Rivercrest and through him to the territorial governor." Abigail replied firmly. "I'm here as an educator and liaison with the full knowledge of proper authorities." Richardson nodded. "Good. That may prevent complications, but be aware, not everyone in the military or government shares your perspective on peaceful coexistence. There are powerful interests still pushing for complete removal of all Sioux to permanent reservations." The warning was delivered with genuine concern, Abigail realized. "Thank you, Captain. I'll bear that in mind." When she rejoined Swift Arrow, his expression was questioned. What did the blue coat want? To warn me that my presence here is creating discussion among white authorities, and to suggest that despite his personal report, there are those who still wish to force all Sioux onto reservations. Swift Arrow's jaw tightened. We have always known this. The peace we build is fragile, like spring ice on the river. They rode back to camp in thoughtful silence. The encounter had ended peacefully, but it served as a stark reminder of the larger forces at work beyond their immediate community. The agreements with Rivercrest, however well-intentioned, held little weight against military orders or federal policy. At camp, Chief Greyhawk received their report with characteristic calm. Through Swift Arrow's translation, he shared his perspective with Abigail. My father says the bluecoats are like wolves, some lone hunters, others in packs. This one seems honorable, but he answers to the pack leader. We must be vigilant, but not fearful. Our people have faced greater threats. The hunting party departed again after the meeting, determined to secure meat both for the camp and as the promised gift to the soldiers. Abigail found herself assigned to help prepare medicinal supplies with Singing Bird, a task that required concentration and precision, leaving little room for dwelling on troubling thoughts. By evening, the hunters returned triumphant with 3 buffalo. The camp sprang into coordinated action, butchering the massive animals according to traditional protocols. Nothing would be wasted. Meat for eating and preserving, hides for clothing and shelter, bones for tools, sinew for thread, organs for specific uses. As promised, Swift Arrow sent 2 warriors to deliver choice cuts to the soldiers' temporary camp. They returned, reporting that the gift had been well received, with Captain Richardson offering coffee and sugar in exchange, a respectful gesture. That night, as the community celebrated the successful hunt with feasting and stories, Abigail found herself seated beside Swift Arrow near the central fire. For a time, they watched the celebrations in comfortable silence. "You were brave today," he said finally, riding alone toward armed soldiers. "Not brave," she countered. "Simply practical. They were less likely to perceive a threat from a woman." Swift Arrow studied her profile in the firelight. "You begin to think like a Lakota, see advantage in what others call weakness." The observation pleased her more than she expected. "I'm trying to understand your ways. It isn't always easy." "Understanding never is," he agreed. "My father once told me that wisdom comes from standing in another's moccasins. You have stepped into our world with open eyes and heart. Few from your people attempt this." The firelight cast dancing shadows across his strong features, highlighting cheekbones and the intelligent awareness in his dark eyes. Abigail found herself noticing these details with unexpected intensity. "Your world has much to teach," she said softly. Something shifted in Swift Arrow's expression, a momentary vulnerability beneath the warrior's composure. Before he could respond, however, Morning Dove approached with a plate of choice buffalo meat. "For honored hunter and teacher," she announced with a knowing smile that made Abigail wonder how transparent her thoughts had been. Later, as she prepared for sleep in Morning Dove's family teepee, Abigail reflected on the day's events, the military encounter, the successful hunt, and that quiet moment with Swift Arrow. Each represented a different aspect of her new reality. The external threats that could destroy this community, the ancient practices that sustained it, and the unexpected personal connections forming within it. Tomorrow would bring new lessons. Singing Bird had promised to teach her about birthing herbs, while several adults had requested English instruction. The dual role of student and teacher suited Abigail, providing purpose and connection in this world so different from the one she had left behind. Outside, beneath the vast star field of the prairie night, the camp settled. Wolf songs echoed from distant ridges, haunting reminders of wild forces beyond human control. Yet within the circle of teepees, warm fires and shared stories created a sphere of community that felt increasingly like home. A month passed swiftly in the summer camp, each day bringing new challenges and revelations for Abigail. Her fair skin darkened under the prairie sun, her hands grew calloused from practical tasks, and her vocabulary of Sioux words expanded. The woman no longer smiled at her clumsy attempts to scrape hides or weave baskets. Now they nodded with approval as her skills improved, incorporating her into their work circles with increasing ease. Each evening, she conducted English lessons beneath a large cottonwood at the camp's edge. Her students included not only children, but also adults who recognized the growing necessity of communicating with white settlers. Swift Arrow attended regularly, though he already spoke English better than most. He claimed he came to assist with explanations, but Abigail suspected he enjoyed watching her teach, a glimpse of the woman she had been in her former life. One evening, as twilight settled over the hills and her students dispersed to their family fires, Swift Arrow lingered. "You have good medicine as a teacher," he observed. "The children listen even when tired after a long day." "Teaching has always felt natural to me," Abigail replied, though the subject matter in Philadelphia was quite different: literature, mathematics, history. "These things you miss?" The question was perceptive, touching on thoughts Abigail had been reluctant to examine. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I especially miss books, the stories, the ideas, the window into other worlds." She gestured to the surrounding camp. "Though I've traded one kind of knowledge for another, I suppose." Swift Arrow considered this. "Knowledge is like a river. Many streams flow into one current." He hesitated, then added, "Tomorrow I will show you something after the morning meal." Curious, Abigail arrived at his teepee the following day to find him waiting with horses saddled. "Where are we going?" "Not far. Place I think you should see." They rode into the foothills, following game trails through stands of pine and aspen. The cool mountain air was a welcome relief from the summer heat of the valley. After an hour's ride, they crested a ridge overlooking a secluded meadow where a small cabin stood, incongruous in this wilderness setting. "A white man's dwelling?" Abigail asked, surprised. Swift Arrow nodded. "Old trapper, Ben Hawkins, lived here many winters, traded fair with Lakota, learned our ways, our language, died 2 winters ago, his choice to be buried on this ridge." He pointed to a simple marker beneath a gnarled pine. "Why did he stay here, so far from settlements?" "Said he found peace among these hills that towns could not give." Swift Arrow dismounted, tying his horse to a young aspen. "Come." "Something." "Inside, you should see." The cabin's interior was spare but well-maintained. A stone fireplace occupied one wall, simple furnishings another. But what captured Abigail's attention was the third wall, lined entirely with bookshelves filled with volumes of every size. "Books," she breathed, moving toward them reverently. Her fingers traced leather spines, cloth bindings, titles half-faded. With age, Shakespeare, Milton, Thoreau, Emerson, scientific treatises, philosophical works, histories, and journals of exploration. Hawkins believed in 2 kinds of knowledge, Swift Arrow explained. "That of books and that of land." "Said true. Wisdom came from both." He gestured around the cabin. "After death, my father ordered this place protected, sacred in its way, like our ancestral sites." Abigail turned to him, understanding dawning. "You're offering me access to these books?" He nodded. "Path is well marked. You ride here when duties. Allow, read, think, write your own thoughts. Bring knowledge back to camp as Hawkins once did." The thoughtfulness of the gesture overwhelmed her. Swift Arrow had recognized a core aspect of her identity she feared losing, and found a way to honor it. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing more elaborate words would be inadequate. Swift Arrow moved to the cabin's single window, looking out across the meadow. Hawkins was respected by my people because he learned our ways without forgetting his own. He stood between worlds like you tried to do. He turned back to her. Not an easy path, often lonely, but it's important. In that moment, something shifted between them, a deepening of understanding, a recognition of shared purpose that transcended their different origins. The air in the cabin felt suddenly charged with an unspoken possibility. A distant thunderclap broke the spell. Swift Arrow glanced toward the darkening sky, visible through the window. "Storm comes. We should return to camp." They secured the cabin and rowed swiftly back, reaching the valley just as fat raindrops began to fall. By the time they arrived at camp, the storm had intensified, sending everyone hurrying for shelter. Inside Mourning Dove's family teepee, Abigail found herself thinking about Swift Arrow. The thoughtfulness behind showing her the cabin, the way he seemed to truly see her needs and concerns. These reflections were interrupted when Mourning Dove entered, rain dripping from her braids. "Riders coming," she announced, "from the Rivercrest direction." Despite the storm, Swift Arrow and several warriors rode out to meet the approaching party. They returned escorting 3 sodden figures, Sheriff Jenkins, Dr. Wilson, and a stranger in the formal attire of a government official. Though his clothes were now thoroughly drenched, Chief Greyhawk ordered a council fire built beneath a large hide shelter at the camp's center. Once the visitors had changed into dry blankets provided by the tribe, a formal meeting convened. "Miss Thornton," Jenkins nodded in greeting. "You're looking well." "Sheriff," she replied warmly. "Dr. Wilson, what brings you out in such weather?" Jenkins gestured to the stranger. "This is Mr. Howard Ellsworth from the Territorial Indian Commission. He's here about the railroad matter and the new agreements." Ellsworth was a thin man with spectacles and a nervous demeanor that seemed exacerbated by finding himself in a Sioux camp. As Abigail made introductions, she noted his surprise at her easy manner with the tribal leaders. "You actually live among them?" he asked incredulously when they had a moment apart. "For over a month now," she confirmed. "I'm learning their language and teaching English. It's been remarkably educational." "Quite unconventional," Ellsworth murmured, "but potentially useful for my purposes. I need to communicate complex legal and technical details about the railroad proposal." The council began formally, with Swift Arrow translating between Sioux and English. Ellsworth presented maps showing the proposed rerouting of the railroad line away from the primary hunting grounds, as negotiated earlier with Jenkins. The Dakota Eastern Railroad Company has reluctantly agreed to consider the southern route, Ellsworth explained, but they have conditions. Chief Greyhawk listened impassively as Swift Arrow translated the conditions. A 50-foot right-of-way through a narrow portion of traditional Sioux territory, permission to establish a water station near Crooked Creek, and assurances that the construction crews would not be harassed. "In exchange," Ellsworth continued, "the territorial government will formally recognize the hunting rights outlined in the original treaty and provide compensation for the inconvenience." When this was translated, Greyhawk spoke at length. Swift Arrow conveyed his response. "My father says words on paper have proven fragile in the past. What guarantees do we have that these agreements will be honored when the Iron Horse runs and white settlements grow along its path?" It was a penetrating question that struck at the heart of decades of broken treaties. Ellsworth shifted uncomfortably. "The territorial governor has personally endorsed this agreement," he replied, "and there will be a military presence at Fort Laramie to ensure compliance by both parties." Abigail noted the skeptical expressions among the tribal council. The military was viewed more as threat than protection by most Sioux. "Perhaps," she suggested, "the agreement could include provisions for regular meetings between tribal representatives and territorial officials, with witnesses from Rivercrest who have proven trustworthy." This proposal sparked interest. Jenkins nodded approvingly. Regular communication might prevent misunderstandings before they escalate. The negotiations continued through the afternoon. As dusk approached, Ellsworth expressed surprise at the sophistication of the Sioux counter-proposals. "I expected more. Resistance, less pragmatism," he confided to Abigail as they took a brief break. Superintendent Parker at the Indian Agency described them as intractable. "They're fighting for their survival," Abigail replied. "That requires both principle and pragmatism. The path Swift Arrow and Chief Greyhawk are navigating is tremendously difficult, maintaining their people's way of life while adapting to inevitable changes." Ellsworth studied her with newfound respect. "You've gained unusual insight in your time here. The Commission might benefit from your observations." By evening, the framework of an agreement had taken shape, to be formalized in writing and brought back for signatures. As the meeting concluded, Jenkins pulled Abigail aside with news from Rivercrest. "Harold Blackwood has been convicted of fraud and attempted murder," he reported. "He'll serve 20 years at the territorial prison." "That's welcome news," Abigail said. "How is the town faring?" "Better than expected. We held proper elections. Samuel Griffith, the blacksmith, is our new mayor. Trade has improved without Blackwood's excessive taxes, and several families who left during his regime have returned. And Mrs. Simmons, thriving. The general store has expanded. She asks after you regularly." Jenkins hesitated. "Some folks are concerned about you, though. Living among the Sioux for so long. They fear I've gone native?" Abigail suggested with a wry smile. "Something like that. There are rumors, nothing I give credence to, but perhaps you might consider a brief visit to town. Show everyone you're well and choose this life freely." The suggestion made practical sense. Abigail had been entirely immersed in Sioux life for a month, with no contact with her former community. A visit might ease concerns and allow her to gather supplies, and books from the cabin that would be useful for her teaching. "I'll consider it," she promised. The visitors stayed overnight, continuing discussions informally around family fires. Ellsworth, initially tense, gradually relaxed as he observed the orderly camp life. Dr. Wilson distributed medicines and examined several tribal members with chronic conditions, exchanging knowledge with Singing Bird through Abigail's translation. The following morning, it dawned clear after the storm. As the Rivercrest party prepared to depart, Dr. Wilson approached Abigail. "I've been meaning to tell you, your brother's personal effects arrived from Philadelphia finally. They're stored at my office. Nothing valuable, I'm afraid, but perhaps of sentimental importance." The unexpected mention of Thomas brought a surge of grief Abigail had suppressed in the intensity of recent months. "Thank you. I'll collect them when I visit." After the visitors departed, Abigail sought out Swift Arrow. "Sheriff Jenkins suggested I make a brief return to Rivercrest to calm concerns about my welfare and collect some personal items." Swift Arrow nodded thoughtfully. "Wise idea. Shows good faith to those who supported new agreements." He paused. "I will accompany you, with 2 warriors, after Buffalo Hunt concludes next week." The Buffalo Hunt was the summer camp's most significant event, a coordinated effort involving most of the tribe's men and lasting several days. Its success would determine food security for the coming winter. Women prepared preservation materials, while hunters maintained weapons and performed rituals to ensure success. Abigail used the relative quiet of the hunting party's absence to intensify her language studies with Mourning Dove and the elders. She also rode twice to Hawkins' cabin, spending precious hours reading and making notes in the journal she'd begun keeping of her experiences. On her second visit, absorbed in Thoreau's reflections on Walden Pond, she failed to notice approaching hoofbeats until a shadow fell across the cabin's open door. Startled, she looked up to find a stranger, a white man in trail-worn clothes, watching her with undisguised surprise. "Well now," he drawled, Ain't you a sight? White woman out here alone, reading like she's in some Boston parlor. Abigail rose cautiously. This cabin is protected by the Lakota Sioux. Are you lost, sir? The man chuckled, stepping inside uninvited. Not lost, ma'am. Hunting. Game trails led me here. His gaze traveled the cabin before returning to her. You living here? All alone? I'm visiting from the Sioux camp in the valley, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite growing unease. Chief Greyhawk's people. This information gave the man pause. You with the Indians? Willingly? I am, as their teacher and translator. He studied her skeptically, then shrugged. Heard rumors about a white woman living with the Sioux, thought it was trail talk. He extended a calloused hand. Jim Calvert, trapper and guide, currently showing some railroad surveyors the lay of the land north of here. Abigail accepted the handshake cautiously. Railroad surveyors, the approved route runs south of these hills. Calvert's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. Does it now? Guess they're just being thorough, checking all options. The revelation sent a chill through Abigail. The negotiations with Ellsworth were proceeding in good faith, while simultaneously surveyors were examining the very route the Sioux had rejected, through prime hunting grounds. These surveyors, she pressed, are they with Dakota Eastern Railroad? Might be, Calvert replied evasively. Don't involve myself in their business details. He glanced around the cabin again. Old Ben Hawkins' place, ain't it? Knew him years back. Peculiar man, living so close to Indian territory. He had good relations with the Sioux, Abigail said pointedly. So I heard. Calvert moved toward the bookshelves, running a finger along the spines. Mighty fine collection, worth something to the right buyer. They're not for sale. They belong to the tribe now. This statement clearly amused him. Indians owning books. Now I've heard everything. He turned back to her. Listen, miss, you seem like an educated woman. Whatever arrangement you've got with these Sioux, you might want to reconsider. Changes coming to these parts. Armies establishing new forts along the Bozeman Trail. Settlers pushing west by the hundreds. The Indians' days of roaming free are numbered. The treaties guarantee their hunting grounds, Abigail countered. Calvert laughed outright. Treaties ain't worth the paper they're written on once gold's discovered, or railroads need passing. His expression turned serious. I've seen how these things end. It ain't pretty for anyone who ties their fate too closely to the tribes. Before Abigail could respond, movement outside caught her attention. Through the window, she glimpsed two Sioux hunters approaching on horseback, scouts from the main hunting party, recognizable by their distinctive feathers. Calvert followed her gaze. Your friends, I take it. Then I'll be on my way. He moved toward the door, then paused. One piece of friendly advice, miss. There's a world of difference between being a white teacher to Indians and being mistaken for one who's joined them completely. Soldiers and settlers don't always pause to make that distinction when trouble starts. With that warning, he departed, mounting his horse and riding into the trees just as the Sioux scouts arrived. The younger of the two, Eagle Feather, dismounted. With fluid grace, bow at the ready. Man, leave. Who? He asked in broken English. A trapper, Abigail replied, her mind still processing Calvert's revelations. He stumbled upon the cabin by accident. Eagle Feather's expression remained suspicious. No accident. White men in hills, 3 days. Following buffalo, watching camp. This confirmation of multiple intruders alarmed Abigail. We should return to camp. Swift Arrow needs to know about this. The hunting party had returned when they reached the valley, their efforts successful beyond expectations. 6 buffalo had been taken, ensuring abundant meat for the coming winter. The camp was abuzz with activity as butchering began, and meat-drying racks were prepared. Swift Arrow listened to Abigail's account of the encounter with growing concern. Surveyors north of our camp, while treaty men talk of the southern route? His expression darkened. Old game, speak peace with one hand, prepare war with the other. The trapper mentioned new forts along the Bozeman Trail, Abigail added, and increasing settler movement westward. Swift Arrow nodded grimly. We have heard such rumors. Many tribes further west are already fighting to protect hunting grounds. He gazed toward the distant hills. If buffalo migration routes are cut by railroad or settlers, winter will bring hunger, no matter how successful the summer hunt. That evening, as the community celebrated the successful hunt, undercurrents of tension ran beneath the festivities. Swift Arrow conferred at length with his father and the tribal council. Warriors took turns at expanded watch positions around the camp's perimeter. Abigail found herself contemplating Calvert's warning about being too closely tied to the tribe's fate. Her position was indeed precarious, neither fully accepted in white society anymore, nor truly Sioux. Yet as she watched Mourning Dove laughing with her cousins, remembered Swift Arrow's thoughtful gift of access to Hawkins' library, and considered the rich knowledge Singing Bird had shared, she realized these connections had become precious to her. Later, as most of the camp slept, Swift Arrow sought her out where she sat beside a dying fire, writing in her journal. "Tomorrow, we prepare for the Rivercrest journey," he said, settling beside her. "4 warriors will accompany us, not 2 as planned. Safer with survey men in hills," Abigail nodded. "Will you tell Sheriff Jenkins about the Northern Survey work?" "Yes. Must know which white men speak with a forked tongue." He stared into the embers. If the railroad truly plans a northern route through buffalo lands, peace becomes harder to maintain. The gravity of his tone conveyed the stakes more clearly than elaborate explanations could have. The fragile balance they had been building between tradition and adaptation, between separate cultures finding common ground, might collapse under external pressures neither community could control. "What would happen then?" she asked quietly. Swift Arrow's profile was resolute in the dim light. "Then difficult choices come. For my people, for Rivercrest." He turned to meet her gaze. "For you, Abigail Thornton. Path between worlds grows narrow when those worlds prepare for conflict." In the silence that followed, Abigail felt the weight of these potential choices, not abstract or distant, but immediate and personal. Her journey from reluctant bride to cultural mediator had led her to a precipice she hadn't anticipated, where, more than her own fate hung in the balance, Swift Arrow seemed to read her thoughts. "Fear solves nothing," he said gently. "Each day brings its own steps to walk. Tomorrow we will ride to Rivercrest. We speak the truth. We listen. We search for a path forward." His words, simple yet profound, eased the tightness in her chest. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with clearer understanding than she'd possessed before coming to live among the Sioux. "One step at a time," she agreed. Swift Arrow smiled, a rare, unguarded expression that transformed his usually serious features. "First step, sleep. Journey begins early." As he rose to leave, their hands brushed briefly, a momentary contact that sent unexpected warmth through Abigail's veins. Their eyes held for a heartbeat longer than necessary before he turned away, moving silently through the sleeping camp. Alone again, Abigail added a final entry to her journal before seeking her own rest. The path ahead might narrow, as Swift Arrow warned, but she was no longer the frightened woman who had almost married Harold Blackwood out of desperation. Whatever difficult choices awaited, she would make them with the strength and wisdom both worlds had given her. The journey to Rivercrest took 2 days, as Swift Arrow chose to follow less direct trails to avoid potential encounters with surveyors or soldiers. Their party, Abigail, Swift Arrow, and 4 warriors, traveled watchfully, making camp at dusk in defensible positions and maintaining guards throughout the night. Though they spotted distant smoke from what might have been surveyors' camps, they encountered no one, As they created the final ridge overlooking Rivercrest, Abigail felt a strange dissonance. The town appeared both familiar and foreign, like revisiting a place from a half-remembered dream. In the 2 months since she'd left, subtle changes had occurred. New construction had begun at the edge of town, the livery stable had expanded, and a freshly painted sign hung outside what had been Blackwood's office, now bearing Mayor Griffith's name. "Different than you remember?" Swift Arrow asked, noting her intent gaze. "Yes and no," she replied. "The buildings are the same, but it feels smaller somehow." He nodded understandingly. When vision expands, known places shrink. They rode down Main Street in the late afternoon, drawing the expected stares and whispers. Abigail wore a mixture of her original clothing and Sioux-made garments. Practical riding skirt paired with beaded moccasins, white blouse with a beautifully embroidered vest Mourning Dove had gifted her. Her hair, longer now and sun-lightened, was braided in a style halfway between white and Sioux fashion. Sheriff Jenkins emerged from his office as they approached, alerted by the commotion their arrival created. "Miss Thornton, Chief Swift Arrow, welcome back to Rivercrest." "Sheriff," Abigail nodded, "we have important information to discuss." Jenkins glanced at the gathering crowd of curious onlookers. "My office would be more private." Inside, they related the encounter with Jim Calvert and the evidence of surveying activity in the northern hills, directly contradicting the southern route being negotiated with Ellsworth. "Damn," Jenkins muttered. "Either Ellsworth is being played by his superiors or he's deliberately misleading us all." "Can you send a message to the territorial capital?" Abigail asked. "Demand clarification before any agreement is signed?" "I dispatched a rider yesterday with our initial response to Ellsworth's proposal. I can send another tomorrow with these new concerns." Jenkins rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "The problem is proving these surveyors are actually working for Dakota Eastern. They could claim they're simply mapping the territory for other purposes." Swift Arrow's expression remained stoic, but Abigail could read the tension in his shoulders. "My people have lived through many broken promises. Words on paper mean little when actions speak differently." Before Jenkins could respond, the office. Udoka opened, admitting Mrs. Simmons. The older woman stopped short at the sight of Abigail, then rushed forward to embrace her. "Look at you," she exclaimed, stepping back to take in Abigail's appearance. "Healthy and strong, if a bit weathered by the sun." Her shrewd eyes noted the subtle changes in posture, confidence, and attire. "Life among the Sioux clearly agrees with you. It has been challenging but rewarding," Abigail replied warmly. "I've learned so much, Mrs. Simmons." The storekeeper nodded to Swift Arrow respectfully. "Chief, your people's craftsmanship is still greatly missed in our market. The beadwork and hides we used to trade for were superior to anything coming from the East." This acknowledgement of past positive relations seemed to ease some of Swift Arrow's tension. Perhaps such trade may happen again, if true agreements can be reached. They continued their discussion at Mrs. Simmons's home behind the general store, where she insisted on providing a proper meal. Over dinner, they outlined a strategy. Jenkins would investigate the survey parties, while Swift Arrow would send scouts to monitor their activities. If evidence confirmed they were working for Dakota Eastern, they would confront Ellsworth directly before any false agreement could be finalized. "You'll stay in town tonight?" Mrs. Simmons asked as the meal concluded. Abigail glanced at Swift Arrow, who nodded. "One night. We've arranged to meet Dr. Wilson tomorrow about medical supplies for the tribe." "Then you must stay here," the older woman insisted. "I've kept your old room exactly as you left it." That evening, after Swift Arrow and his warriors had been settled in the town's small hotel, a significant step forward in relations that would have been unthinkable under Blackwood's leadership, Abigail found herself alone in her former lodgings. The narrow bed, simple washstand, and small writing desk seemed relics from another lifetime, comfortable yet confining after the open spaces of the Sioux camp. She unpacked Thomas's personal effects that Dr. Wilson had delivered: a pocket watch, a well-worn Bible with family births and deaths recorded inside, letters from friends in Philadelphia, and a daguerreotype of their parents taken years before. These fragments of her former life stirred complex emotions. Thomas had been her last connection to family, to the world of their upbringing. His death had set her on an unplanned path that now seemed, despite its hardships, somehow destined. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. Mayor Samuel Griffith, a barrel-chested man with an impressive moustache and direct manner, arrived at Mrs. Simmons's store as Abigail was helping restock shelves, a familiar task that her hands remembered. "Miss Thornton," he greeted her, removing his hat, "forgive the intrusion, but I hoped for a word in my capacity as mayor." "Of course, Mr. Griffith. I understand you're acting as something of an intermediary between Rivercrest and the Sioux." He began without preamble. "I want you to know that most of us support peaceful relations and fair treatment. Blackwood's methods brought nothing but trouble." "I'm glad to hear it," Abigail replied cautiously. "That said," Griffith continued, "there's concern about these railroad matters. Rivercrest's growth depends on that connection to eastern markets. We can't afford to be bypassed if the line is rerouted too far south." The mayor's transparency was refreshing after Blackwood's manipulations. "The current proposal would bring the railroad within 5 miles of town," Abigail explained. "Close enough for practical access while respecting the Sioux hunting grounds," Griffith nodded. "A reasonable compromise, but we've heard rumors of government pressure to push the northern route regardless of local agreements." "We've heard similar concerns," Abigail acknowledged. "Chief Swift Arrow is equally troubled by surveyors working in the northern hills, while negotiations focus on the southern route." "Two-faced dealing," Griffith frowned. "Unfortunately common with the territorial government." He straightened his vest decisively. "Rivercrest Council has voted to support the negotiated southern route officially. We believe stable relations with the Sioux benefit everyone's prosperity." This unexpected alliance heartened Abigail. "The chief will be pleased to hear it. United local voices might carry more weight with territorial authorities." After Griffith departed, Abigail sought out Swift Arrow, finding him in conversation with several townsmen outside the blacksmith shop. The ease with which he engaged with these frontier men, discussing hunting techniques, weather patterns, and horse breeding, revealed his diplomatic skills. Building understanding began with such small, practical exchanges. Mayor Griffith visited, she informed him when they had a private moment. "Rivercrest Council officially supports the Southern Railroad route." Swift Arrow absorbed this news with measured optimism. Good allies to have. But the final decision comes from the territorial capital, where Sioux voices are rarely heard. Their next stop was Dr. Wilson's office, where the physician had prepared supplies for Singing Bird. As they discussed medicinal applications, commotion erupted on the street outside. Raised voices, the pounding of hooves, shouts of alarm. Dr. Wilson moved to the window. "Soldiers," he reported grimly, "a full detachment." Swift Arrow tensed, hand moving instinctively toward the knife at his belt. "How many?" 20, perhaps 30. "Captain Richardson appears to be leading them." This detail provided slight reassurance. Captain Richardson had been reasonable during their previous encounter. Abigail joined the doctor at the window, watching as the cavalry unit formed up in the town square. A crowd gathered, with Sheriff Jenkins pushing through to meet the captain. "We should join them," she suggested. "Find out what brings them here." Outside, Captain Richardson was dismounting as they approached. He acknowledged them with a nod that revealed no surprise at finding Swift Arrow in town. "Miss Thornton." "Chief, fortuitous that you're both here. Saves me sending messengers to your camp." "What brings you to Rivercrest, Captain?" Jenkins asked directly. Richardson removed his gloves, his expression grave. Multiple matters of concern. First, I've been ordered to inform all settlements and Indian encampments that hostilities have broken out between the Army and Northern Cheyenne near Fort Reno. There's concern the conflict may spread to other tribes. This news sent a ripple of unease through the gathering crowd. The Cheyenne were allies of the Sioux, bound by language, custom, and intermarriage. What sparked these hostilities? Abigail asked. Dispute over hunting territories encroached upon by the Bozeman Trail, Richardson replied. Unfortunately, shots were fired, casualties taken on both sides. Swift Arrow's face remained impassive, but Abigail could read the concern in his eyes. Conflict with the Cheyenne inevitably affected all Plains tribes. Second, Richardson continued, I've received orders regarding the Dakota Eastern Railroad survey. The territorial governor has endorsed the northern route, despite local objections. Survey teams have territorial authorization to continue their work. Mayor Griffith pushed forward. That contradicts everything we've been negotiating. The southern route was agreed upon by all parties here. I'm simply conveying official decisions, Mr. Mayor. The northern route has been deemed more economically viable by the railroad company and more strategically advantageous by the War Department. Strategically advantageous? Jenkins echoed with sudden understanding. Because it would cut off Sioux access to their hunting grounds, force them onto reservations. Richardson didn't confirm this interpretation, but his silence was telling. Finally, he said, I have instructions regarding... He hesitated, glancing at Abigail. Regarding white persons living among the Indian tribes. The territorial governor has expressed concern about divided loyalties during these unstable times. The implication was unmistakable. Abigail felt the weight of every gaze in the square. Are you saying I'm prohibited from returning to the Sioux camp? Not prohibited, but I strongly advised against it. The Army cannot guarantee protection to whites who choose to remain with tribes that might become hostile. Swift Arrow stepped forward, his dignity commanding attention. Abigail Thornton lives under my protection and that of Chief Greyhawk. No harm comes to her among Lakota. I don't doubt your intentions, Chief, Richardson replied, but orders from Fort Laramie are clear. The situation is deteriorating throughout the territory. A tense silence fell over the square. The conflict they had feared was materializing, not as an isolated disagreement over a railroad route, but as part of a larger pattern across the frontier. The pressure to separate cultures, to dissolve the bridges being built between communities, came not from local animosities, but from distant powers with broader agendas. Mayor Griffith broke the impasse. Captain, we appreciate the warning about the Cheyenne situation. As for the railroad matter, Rivercrest will be sending a formal petition to the territorial governor reaffirming our support for the negotiated southern route. As is your right, Mr. Mayor. Richardson's tone suggested the futility of such efforts. Regarding Miss Thornton, Jenkins added, her arrangement with the Sioux has territorial approval through previous communications. Unless that status has been officially revoked, she remains free to continue her educational work. The legal technicality gave Richardson pause. I have no specific orders regarding Miss Thornton personally. My instructions were general in nature. The gathered townspeople began to disperse as the immediate tension eased, though concerned discussions continued among small groups. Swift Arrow signaled his warriors, who had maintained a vigilant perimeter throughout the confrontation. We return to camp immediately, he told Abigail quietly. My father must hear of the Cheyenne conflict. The decision crystallized instantly in Abigail's mind. I'm coming with you. Swift Arrow studied her face. You understand what returning means now. The Army has drawn a line. Crossing it places you outside their protection. I crossed that line when I first accepted Morning Dove's invitation. She replied steadily. These warnings changed nothing. Within the hour, they had gathered their supplies and prepared for departure. Mrs. Simmons pressed packages of coffee, sugar, and fabric into Abigail's hands, while Dr. Wilson added to the medical supplies. Jenkins provided the latest territorial maps, marking military positions they should avoid. As they mounted their horses at the edge of town, a small crowd gathered to bid them farewell, no longer viewing the Sioux warriors with suspicion, but with the respect earned through honest dealings. Mayor Griffith stepped forward with a sealed letter. "For Chief Greyhawk," he said, handing it to Swift Arrow. "Rivercrest's formal commitment to honor our agreements regardless of territorial decisions. We're stronger working together than divided by others' ambitions." Swift Arrow accepted the document with appropriate ceremony. "Your words will reach my father's ears. Rivercrest shows wisdom many larger settlements lack." Their journey back took a more circuitous route, avoiding open terrain where cavalry patrols might spot them. Swift Arrow pushed the pace, concerned about developments at the summer camp during their absence. They traveled through twilight into early evening before making camp in a protected ravine. As they sat beside the small, shielded fire, Abigail contemplated the precarious path ahead. "What will your father do about the Cheyenne conflict?" "Send messengers to allied bands, gather information, perhaps call the Council of Chiefs." Swift Arrow stared into the flames. "Difficult balance between honor to allies and survival of our people and the railroad. If the northern route proceeds despite objections," his jaw tightened, "some young warriors will want to fight, destroy survey markers, drive workers away. Elders will counsel patience, seeking other solutions." He looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "What matters most is not the specific battle, but protecting what sustains us, the buffalo, the sacred places, the freedom to follow seasons as we always have." Abigail nodded, understanding. "And my place in all this?" Captain Richardson's warning was clear. Swift Arrow was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried unusual softness. "Among my people, each person chooses their path. No one commanded you to come to our camp. No one commands you to stay. That choice remains yours alone. And if I choose to stay, even as tensions rise, then you walk a difficult trail beside us." His dark eyes reflected firelight. "But not alone." The simple declaration held deeper meaning than elaborate promises could have conveyed. In the silent moment that followed, something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond that had formed during these months, transcending their different origins. They reached the summer camp the following afternoon to find it already in transition. News of the Cheyenne conflict had reached them through other channels, and Chief Greyhawk had ordered preparations for moving deeper into the Black Hills, away from potential confrontation. Abigail immersed herself in the urgent tasks, helping. Morning Dove packed medicinal supplies while Swift Arrow reported to the tribal council. The community's response was organized without panic. Generations of experience had taught them how to relocate swiftly when threats emerged. That evening, as fires burned low and the camp prepared for early departure, Abigail found a quiet moment to record the latest developments in her journal. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on her thoughts. The world was shifting beneath them all. Sioux, settlers, soldiers, driven by forces far removed from this valley, yet determining their futures. Swift Arrow found her there, seated on a fallen log at the camp's edge, journal open on her lap. Without speaking, he settled beside her, offering a small wooden object he'd been carving. Two hands clasped together, one larger, one smaller, rendered with surprising delicacy. "In times of change," he said finally, "we hold to what matters." Abigail accepted the carving, understanding its symbolism. The joining of different strengths, the connection formed across divides. "Whatever comes," she replied. "I've made my choice." Swift Arrow nodded, his shoulder brushing hers as they sat watching stars emerge above the darkening hills. The frontier stretched before them, a landscape of both conflict and possibility, where cultures collided and occasionally, against all odds, found ways to grow stronger together. The path ahead would not be easy. The railroad would eventually come, bringing changes no one could fully predict. The pressure on the Sioux way of life would continue from multiple directions. Abigail's position between worlds would grow increasingly complex. Yet in this moment, as night settled over the camp preparing for tomorrow's journey, she felt a certainty that transcended these concerns. The frightened woman who had nearly married Rivercrest's cruel mayor out of desperation had found something unexpected on this frontier. Not just escape from one man's tyranny, but a purpose and connection that gave meaning to freedom. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. But tonight, beneath the vast prairie sky, Abigail Thornton and Swift Arrow sat in companionable silence, two people from different worlds who had found common ground in the most unlikely of circumstances, a fragile bridge across cultures that might, with care and courage, withstand the storms gathering on the horizon. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.